Hi, colleagues, friends, and fellow professionals, especially those that are in the procurement or the supply chain environment. Today, I want to talk to you about some of the theories that we've been taught that perhaps I'm going to challenge you that we need to radically change or transform the things that we've been doing and the things that we've been taught. And I'll give you some background why I think some of those theories must be amended, especially if we are to deal with the ills of the society that South Africa is facing today, especially unemployment and inequalities. You perhaps have been taught theories like in the strategic sourcing environment, you've been told that there's something that is called a 4-quadrant model. And that model, the aim of it is to make sure that procurement professionals have a structured way of managing certain commodities, certain products, or certain services. And you've been told, for example, that there is strategic commodities. Right? You'll remember as a procurement professional, right? What we used to call the top right quadrant. That is a very strategic commodities that are there. And generally companies spend a lot of money, and generally those commodities or those products or those services, when they are not available for a company, the operation stops. So it will be different for a mining industry or for a mine, for a bank, financial services, consult. So the products will be different. However, the methodology that you've been taught to select those commodities stays the same. But here's a problem with those principles. Those principles were generally developed in developing countries, right? They assume that there's growth in the economy. They assume that the unemployment rate is quite stable. And they also assume that the majority of the people in a specific economy are catered in the mainstream economy. For example, in the United States, the different challenge that they are facing is to get the minority that are there in the United States into the mainstream economy. And similar principles, you can see them in Europe as well. We have a different set of circumstances in South Africa. And in developing countries, what we have done, we didn't question those principles. We took them as they are, as we've been taught, and we've implemented them. However, since 1994, what those principles have done, they've created these conglomerate companies that are now listed in the JSE that are taking control of the spend of the country. And if you look at the state-owned companies, the bulk of the spend of state-owned companies goes to few companies. Many of them, those are listed in JSE. And it still locks all the majority of people, especially QSEs and EMEs, black-owned companies. They are locked. Remember the 4-quadrant model, what it says, right? Remember the 4 quadrants? You have your strategic commodities, your leverage, your bottleneck, and right there at the bottom, right? You have what we call routine. Those are normal commodities or stationary, depending, of course, on the organization. What we have done since 1994, we said black companies must be given those kind of contracts, stationary, cleaning services, because of the principles that we have been taught. And today, many black-owned companies are still at the periphery of the economy. They cannot get involved. They cannot get into the strategic commodities, even the leverage commodities. They cannot get in because of the principles that we have been taught. So today I want to challenge you to think differently about strategic sourcing, about category management, and of course about the 4-quadrant model. Change that model completely. Because if you're dealing with low growth, a high unemployment rate, and where the majority of people cannot get into the first economy or into the mainstream economy, those principles doesn't work. And go back and look at your own spend. Go and categorize your spend. You'll quickly realize that this is indeed a fact. That the bulk of your spend, that 20% of your spend is going to the minority. you need to go back and change the way you apply the 80-20 principle. And especially if you find yourself in a developing country. We have to change the way we think about small business in this country. And especially people like us in the procurement environment, in the supply chain environment. When suppliers come to us, and especially black-owned suppliers that want to get into the space, they might have innovative ideas, they might even have capacity and capability to do, because we have a lot of them. So our research indicates that we do not have a lack of black-owned QSEs and EMEs in this country. Actually, more than 84% of suppliers and companies that are registered in one kind of a database, whether CIDB or CSD, whatever database, 84% of those are QSEs and EMEs. And we do not have a lack of that. The problem is that because we took the principles that have been developed in developing countries and we try to apply them in our countries without even thinking about the implications of it. What we have done over this year since 1994, the government spend, if you think about the 500 billion, at least 500 billion worth of spend that government is spending. Now, can you imagine 400 billion of that spend going to only 20% of the people that are registered in one kind of a database? So you can clearly see that the majority will never get into the mainstream economy, right? So that is not a challenge that people in developing countries have. Because in developing countries, they have a problem where the minorities are struggling to get into the mainstream economy. But if you're going to apply the very same principle, it's going to fail dismally. So my challenge to you, that I want you to really think about it and change your economic models that you're applying, especially in strategic sourcing or category management, is to radically change the way you do things. Throw out all of those models and make sure that your tier one supplier, so in your company, here's my challenge to you, use the 4-quadrant model to make sure that you are able to bring the majority into the mainstream economy. You are able to bring the minority into tier one, into strategic commodities. And this is the way you're going to assess if the models work. What we will want to see, and especially in state-owned companies, we want to see your tier one suppliers being black youth-owned companies. Because that's where the target should be if we are able to deal with inequalities and unemployment rate that is so high in our country. So if you really want to apply this model correctly, you will find out that at tier one and tier two, those are going to be your black youth-owned companies and the black women-owned companies. Those are the ones that will be occupying those sweet spots, your tier one and tier two suppliers. In other words, the strategic commodities, your leverage and bottleneck, those commodities, we must start seeing those commodities being taken by black youth-owned companies, black women-owned companies, and in general, QSE that are owned by black people. Unfortunately, as we have tested and as we have seen, this is a fact. 46% of the spend of state-owned companies is being shipped out. In general, 80% of state-owned companies, the procurement spend of them, goes to the minority. We've built the stock exchange. If you don't like the numbers that you see on a stock exchange, as a procurement professional, we have ourselves to blame because we made South Africa what it is today economically. It is because of our own actions. Yes, I'm putting myself as a procurement professional as well and a supply chain professional. That's what we did. It really shocked me when I realized what we did over these years. So my challenge to you is, please go back and amend your economic models, amend the way you think about strategic sourcing, the way you think about category management, and the way you think about the 4-quadrant model. We want to see the strategic commodities being taken, where the contracts are being issued in a particular sector, in that particular quadrant. bringing in black youth-owned companies, black women-owned companies, and in general, companies that are owned by black people, and those companies being EMEs and QSE. Are you ready for a challenge? Next time I'll be talking to you about how we amend, how we change our minds about thinking about black-owned companies, especially some of us that are in the procurement space. When a black-owned company comes to you with an idea, with an innovative idea, generally in South Africa, when we see black-owned companies or QSE or EMEs in general, we don't trust them, right? The way we deal with them, you'll see there's a lot of case studies which I'll talk to you later, which will show how we're dealing with black-owned and EMEs and QSEs in this country. And that needs to be radically changed. And of course, that radical change must happen first in our minds. So I've given you an exercise to do. Go back and look at your procurement spend, where the money is going, and radically change your procurement spend.